Hello, I'm Dr. Richard Burchill, Director of Research Engagement at Trends Research and Advisory in Abu Dhabi. We're here today at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., in cooperation with Stimson and the Orfalea Center of the University of California, Santa Barbara, on a conference confronting the challenges of global security posed by Daesh. I'm very pleased to be in the presence of Ambassador Lincoln Bloomfield, the chairman of Stimson. First off, I'd like to thank you for your time, but thank you very much to Stimson for the event. It has been really, very good, and the staff have been fantastic. Following on from our conversations, I'd like to sort of put to you, based on your extensive experience, is Daesh posing sort of new challenges to global security, or can we learn from some of our past experiences?
Well, thank you, Richard, and it's an honor to have you here, and it really is a very interesting conference. My own view is that we combine, we can learn from both the past, but we also have to recognize that what makes Daesh dangerous and what makes it troublesome is their innovation. Right. That every time someone does something different, we need to adapt to it and we need to learn from it. And this is partially because of the changing world and globalization. It's partially because of technology and its effect. It may have to do with factors far from our shores that are sociological and local. Okay. But as our security leadership needs to study it closely, and I think we can learn a lot from the experts at the conference here today.
But that's been one of the common themes throughout the event, as you know, is that it is the innovation, it's the ability of Daesh to adapt, to learn from their past experiences. But what's sort of striking to me is that we have great powers, we have medium powers, we have a lot of powers fighting together. Are we essentially saying that Daesh is better at insecurity than we are at security?
That's a terrific question. I'm reminded of war games that were done by the U.S. military back in the 1990s, looking into the future. The U.S. Army used to have an expression that they wanted to have superiority at every point on the spectrum of war. The problem with non-state groups is that they've gone off the spectrum of war. Yeah. What great countries and what countries like the United States and so many in the world have done is they've embraced international norms, international law, the Geneva Conventions. It is these conventions that Daesh breaks when they use child soldiers to carry weapons and to set off bombs, and when they go into marketplaces and kill civilians. That is against the laws of war. It's against the Geneva Convention, and it poses some very strong challenges to the rest of us.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that especially in the Middle East region, unfortunately. The armed non-state actors are creating large amounts of insecurity in how we approach it. But that leads to a very intriguing question in dealing with an outfit like Daesh. Do we take the military approach, which we'll be talking about later this afternoon, or should we be focused more on the non-military measures? And by that, I don't just mean criminal justice. I mean some of the sociological factors you mentioned earlier.
I think another part of this challenge, and as someone who has worked in the Pentagon and the State Department and the White House going back more than 30 years, is that we, the Americans, and perhaps our allies, are still stuck in old methods. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, when a crisis hits that has the American people very concerned, whether it's justified as much or not, whether they overreact or not, the tendency is to look to the Pentagon. Right. And as someone who is a big supporter of the Pentagon, I believe that we do it perhaps too much and that we have not yet learned to integrate the tools together. One other comment. I'm not always sure that the response has to come born in Washington. No. We talk about broadcasting, we talk about theories to combat extremism, but if you really want to know my view, I think that the key to these things lies in the towns and villages and the churches, the mosques. It has to do with competing for the affections and the aspirations of young people in the world, and giving them role models and pathways to redeem and fulfill their own personal dignity and honor and aspirations, something that I think we need to focus on more.
Right. I mean, that's a very good point to raise. But it's interesting as well from some of the other discussions we've had while we've been in town. The U.S., its approach to foreign policy to other regions of the world. Should the U.S. be concerned about these sort of more localized issues, or should the U.S. do a military response, ensure its own border security and its job's done, or should it get more deeply involved with these societies?
When we say involved, I think one of the innovations in Washington, which we're seeing more, is is instead of saying the U.S. government is going to create an agency and have its own people go and make change in the world, we have learned that there are networks of empowered individuals, civil society groups, local expert groups, humanitarian groups, who actually have great credibility, great wisdom, great knowledge. They speak languages. They're very sympathetic to the local population. So the U.S., I don't think it's black and white. I think that the intelligent answer is to do the things that we might have to do. If you see a large swath of territory taken over by force, where all the assets are stolen, the heritage is being destroyed, people are being killed, and women are being mistreated grievously, you could do nothing.
Yes.
But I think the United States has decided that they have to do something. And now with Daesh actually in 55 countries and training in 20 countries, so that every day people are learning bomb-making skills and they're learning how to do things such as we've seen in Paris and Brussels and could do it anywhere at any time. There is a certain urgency to interfering and stopping that momentum, but the real solution, it seems to me, is to empower other groups that actually have this mission, and they don't have to be U.S. government, but we have to connect to them and know who they are and work with other countries and other governments to encourage them to do good work.
Yeah. And the point you made is very important, that Daesh seems to be spreading more and more around the world, and that leads to the key issue. So either we sufficiently degrade or we defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria. What next in terms of post-conflict or redevelopment, reconstruction? Is that going to have the same priority as the fight against terrorism, or are we going to see interest just fall away, not just from the U.S., but from other governments as well?
You know, I'm not sure, Richard, whether I can tell you what the headline will be, even in the policy community in Washington. When you say defeat and destroy, all the military terms begin with D, degrade, etc., and I could go down the list. I don't look at it that way. I do think that there is an urgent need to have a decisive operation that says to the center of Daesh in Syria and Iraq simultaneously, you will fail.
Yes.
You'll fail quickly. I would not engage in indiscriminate force, but I would engage in decisive operations, whatever that means. And I'm not the general, so we would bring together both area experts and military to decide what is a decisive operation. We would also liaise with local countries and with our allies. But I think, beyond that, there's a bigger question about why is this happening, and I think there needs to be a longer-term conversation.
Definitely.
And it's not all about blaming and punishing. It really is about putting a horizon in the future that we stand for. Absolutely. And some principles that actually people throughout the world, including the Middle East, can identify with and say, well, as with, say, when John F. Kennedy gave his inaugural speech in 1961, people named their children and renamed their streets and villages in Africa and Asia after John F. Kennedy. We need to remember that America does best when its principles are broadly framed and essentially connect to universal aspirations. I think we've lost a little bit about that. Even we don't have to fight everyone's battle, but we do need to stand for the right things, and people need to know that we do.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for your time, Ambassador. Appreciate being here.
Thanks so much.